Hi, my name is Henrik, and for the last couple of years I've been learning French as a foreign language. That gave me the idea to create this channel where I will try to share some tips and tricks on language learning. So, with that said, let's grab a cup of coffee and let's dig into the first video where I will explain the Swedish n and et nouns. Personally, I'm very fond of using mind maps to explain grammatical terms. And that is what I will do in this video. There are several advantages with that, I would say. And one of them is that you can easily add things after. If you find a new topic after and then you want to fit that into your current mind map, and then that is easily done. In Swedish we have two genders, the n nouns and the et nouns. Some examples of common n nouns are en bil, en ost, en fisk, en dörr, en idiot, en hund, en flicka, en pojke. And some examples of et nouns are ett barn, ett hus, ett bröd, ett bord, ett äpple, ett hjärta, ett snöre. The n and et nouns have nothing to do with masculine or feminine forms, as you might find in French, for instance. As you saw, both pojke and flicka are n nouns. So, how do you now know if you're dealing with an n noun or an et noun? Well, unfortunately, there is no way to know that. But about 70 to 80% of the nouns are n nouns. So if you're unsure, it's much more likely that the word you are dealing with is an n noun than vice versa. Alright, with that said, let's move into how to create the determined forms and the plural forms of these nouns. For example, how do we say the house, the houses, the dog, the dogs in Swedish? In Swedish, this is formed by changing the ending of the word. Let's start with the determined forms. In Swedish, the determined form is pretty straightforward. If it's an n noun, you add the letter n or en in the end, depending on if the word ends in a vowel or a consonant. So, I see the dog becomes jag ser hunden. I see the girl becomes jag ser flickan. The determined form of the et nouns works very much in the same way, but then you add a t or an et in the end instead. For example, I see the house becomes jag ser huset. I see the heart becomes jag ser hjärtat. There are of course some exceptions to this rule. For instance, the determined form of nyckel becomes nyckeln, but most determined forms are actually created the way I just explained, by adding n, en, t or et in the end. Okay, some more examples of n nouns in the determined form could be bilen, osten, fisken, dörren, idioten, pojken. And some determined forms of et nouns could be barnet, brödet, bordet, äpplet. Okay, so let's now move on to the plural forms. And unfortunately here it becomes a bit more tricky. So let's start with the plural forms of et nouns. If they end with a consonant, then the plural form is exactly the same. For instance, I see several houses becomes jag ser flera hus. Ett hus, flera hus. If they end with a vowel, then you add n in the end. For example, I see several apples becomes jag ser flera äpplen. Ett äpple, flera äpplen. Then moving on to the plural forms of the n nouns. The plural forms are formed by adding ar, or, or er in the end. There are some rules here. For singulars that ends in an a sound, the a sound, pronounced a in Swedish, then you take away the a and you add or. So I see several girls becomes jag ser flera flickor. En flicka, flera flickor. Then we have the words that ends with the letter e, pronounced in Swedish. Then you take away the e and add ar. So I see several boys becomes jag ser flera pojkar. En pojke, flera pojkar. There are some exceptions here as well. For instance, some occupational words like målare, läkare, etc. that I will speak about in a minute. But the general rule for words ending in is that you add ar. But after that you just need to know if the plural is formed with ar, or er. So let's have some examples of the plural forms of en words. En bil, flera bilar. En ost, flera ostar. En fisk, flera fiskar. En dörr, flera dörrar. En idiot, flera idioter. And then let's take some example of the plural form of nouns. That could be ett bröd, flera bröd. Ett bord, flera bord. Ett äpple, flera äpplen. Unfortunately, we also have some words that change entirely when you make the plural form. For instance, en bok becomes flera böcker in plural. And en man becomes flera män. En hand, flera händer. So these are the rules, but sometimes it might be just easier to learn the plural forms instead of trying to get into all these rules. Okay, so then we come to the determined plural form. And once again, if you know the undetermined form, it's pretty straightforward for the n nouns to create the determined form. If it's an n noun, you add na to the end. So I see the girls become jag ser flickorna. I see the idiots becomes jag ser idioterna. I will also mention some occupational n nouns here that ends in re. For instance, en lärare, en läkare, en målare, etc. The determined form here is exactly as the rule, adding an n in the end. Jag ser läraren. Then we have the plural form, and that is exactly as the singular form in undetermined. So en lärare, flera lärare. En målare, flera målare. And then finally we have the determined plural that is formed by taking away the e and adding na. Jag ser lärarna, jag ser målarna, etc. And finally we have the plural determined forms of the nouns. What we do then is that we add en or a to the ending of the word. I see the houses becomes jag ser husen. I see the apples becomes jag ser äpplena. Another lesson here is to not mix the determined singular form of the n nouns with the determined plural form of the nouns. Jag ser hunden, then you just see one dog. But if I say jag ser husen, then that means that I see several houses. Okay, some of you might then ask, well, I've also heard about den, det and de, and where will that come into this equation? Well, an easy explanation is that you have a descriptive word, an adjective in front, then you need to add den, det or de, that is pronounced dom. So, Jag ser hunden. That is perfectly correct Swedish sentence. But if you want to say that I see the white dog, then you must say jag ser den vita hunden. I see the red house becomes jag ser det röda huset. As you see here, the word order is very similar to how you would say this in English, where the becomes den or det. So, what we need to take with us from this lesson, going forward learning the Swedish words, is that you need to pay attention to if it's an en noun or an et noun. The determined forms in singular, they are pretty straightforward, but the plural forms are much more trickier. So the best approach there might be to just learn the plural forms. So, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. More info can also be found at my site, svenskamedhenrik.com. There you can also download these mind maps in both PDF format and MindNode format. I also have some Anki decks that you can download with the words I've been using in these explanations. Ha det bra så länge, hej då!